어머니 수녀님을 존중이 않지 않은 영구처가 서서히 영웅 대거리에 들어서
맡겨보신 조국의 손 조서를 감격의 환호성 목청 끝 쌓여도 우리가
In 2018, after 7 years on North Korea's throne, Kim Jong-un met with a South Korean president for the first time. During this meeting, President Moon Jae-in expressed his wish to hike Mount Baekdu with Kim Jong-un.
김정은 위원장이 그 소원을 꼭 들어줄 것이라고 믿습니다.
Just prior to this, Kim Jong-un had declared nuclear armament and assassinated his half-brother. He was seen as a ruthless dictator. No one believed that President Moon's wish would come true. But it did.
They met 3 times in 2018. On the last day, they hiked Baekdu Mountain together. It was a truly touching moment for Koreans.
Mount Baekdu holds great significance for Koreans, especially for this man.
North Korea claims that Kim personally rode this horse up this 9,000-foot tall mountain. Propaganda much? Certainly staged.
Mount Baekdu is where his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, fought the Japanese and where his father, Kim Jong-il, was born. Actually, this is a made-up story. Kim Il-sung was indeed stationed in the Mount Baekdu forest area as part of the Independence Army, but it was far from the front lines. Kim Jong-il was born in Russia. But this propaganda has worked pretty well. This mountain had an eruption in 946 that was much stronger than the one that destroyed Pompeii. It was also the primary habitat of tigers, which Koreans had feared for a long time. Mount Baekdu has been a sacred and respected mountain for Koreans for many years. So Kim Jong-un referred to his family as the Baekdu bloodline to justify his hereditary rule. Of course, Mount Baekdu holds special meaning for South Korea too. This song is South Korea's national anthem. It shows that South Korea considers Mount Baekdu as part of its territory. In other words, it signifies that Korea is in a temporary state of division and has not forgotten its commitment to reunification.
백두산이 중국의 유네스코 세계 지질공원이 될 전망입니다.
However, in March 2024, this mountain was designated as the UNESCO World Geopark under the Chinese name Changbai Mountain.
You know, he's born on Mount Baekdu.
Meanwhile, the Korean name Baekdu Mountain has been forgotten worldwide. Now, if you search this area on Google Maps, only the Changbai Mountain appears. How did China turn a sacred mountain of the Korean people into a Chinese mountain in just 6 years? No, it's not just 6 years. This is a matter of at least 40 years.
This is Korean history textbook. When we study history, we don't just learn the history of our own country. Kids grow up learning the history of neighboring country as well.
Which country's history do Korean children learn the most about? Definitely China. It might be the same for Japan, Mongolia, and Vietnam too. Since 221 BC, when Qin Shi Huang first unified the Central Plains, the neighbors of this great nation have always faced the threat of invasion. Today, we live in a globalized world. It's unlikely for China to invade its neighboring countries' territories without a valid reason anymore. Instead, China still shows its strength to its neighbors in different ways. Since the 1990s, China has built 11 dams on the upper part of the Mekong River. This river has historically been a lifeline for Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Because China controls the amount of water released, the environment and local economies nearby have suffered. However, it's difficult to properly protest against China, which holds the most powerful weapon called resources.
However, the sneaky tactic China uses to bully its neighbor is stealing culture.
A prime example is the claim that Genghis Khan was of a Chinese ethnic minority origin, and therefore he was Chinese.
现如今一些西方的学者竟然认为，曾经叱咤亚欧大陆的成吉思汗并不是中国人，而是蒙古活人。
This may sound like child's naive claim, like my dad is Superman, but no.
China is worried that the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, which they control, might become connected to Mongolia and gain independence. Although these two regions are currently divided, the people living here have the same culture and history. China has done everything it can to prevent Inner Mongolia and Mongolia from uniting. With the backing of the Chinese government, numerous scholars have been conducting misleading studies for decades, falsely claiming that Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire were part of China's history.
They continue their work, even you laugh at them. When you forget all about this, their descendants will still make this claim, and your descendants might even come to believe them.
China is doing this almost everywhere they touch borders. Among them, Mount Baekdu is where they are most successfully taking away the culture of their neighbors. If you're hearing about Mount Baekdu for the first time, pay close attention. China will use the success they have here in places like Tibet, Xinjiang, and Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. Mount Baekdu is a 744-meter-high volcano located on the border between China and North Korea. The last major eruption of Mount Baekdu was recorded in 1702. This mountain is considered one of the best preserved volcanic areas in the world. It was famous for being home to many tigers in the past, and it still provides a habitat for various plants and animals. The most stunning feature is Heaven Lake, the world's highest volcanic lake. 3/4 of the mountain is in China, but North Korea shares almost half of the Heaven Lake.
中国6处公园获批，其中包括长白山世界地质公园。
On March 28th, the mountain was listed as a UNESCO Global Geopark following China's application. Given the mountain's recognized geological significance, it seems reasonable that it should be protected.
The strange thing is that China applied for the Geopark exclusively.
There are many UNESCO World Heritage Sites and global geoparks that span multiple countries. There are 36 World Heritage Sites and 4 global geoparks that cross national borders. In fact, in 2019, a year before China, North Korea also applied to register Mount Baekdu as a UNESCO Global Geopark. However, while North Korea blocked its country due to the COVID-19 and struggled to recover, China quickly accelerated UNESCO's inspection and succeeded in registering it exclusively.
China and North Korea call themselves blood-bonded allies. But why did China apply without North Korea?
Modern borders are often drawn without considering the cultural and historical ownership of the land. Although a large part of Mount Baekdu is now Chinese territory, history tells a different story. The area that includes Mount Baekdu was called Gando by Koreans and Yanji by the Chinese. This region was far from both Beijing and Seoul, making it a place where the power of successive Chinese and Korean dynasties had little influence.
Some might have preferred power vacuum. Various nomadic groups of Manchus and Koreans who crossed the river coexisted in this region.
In the 17th century, the Manchu people conquered the Central Plains and established the Qing dynasty. They regarded the Gando region and Mount Baekdu as their ancestral land. They sanctified this area and prohibited the migration of Han Chinese and Koreans. However, in the 19th century, the Qing dynasty weakened due to internal decay and external invasions. As surveillance weakened, many Koreans returned to this area, cleared the rugged land, and established their livelihoods.
A fight over who owned the Gando started between Joseon and Qing. But before they could have genuine dialogue and negotiation about it, the new player showed up. It was the Empire of Japan.
They seized Korea's diplomatic rights in 1905. And in 1909, instead of obtaining rights to construct railroads and mine coal in Manchuria, they made a treaty recognizing Gando as part of the Qing dynasty's territory. this was done without consulting Korea's wishes. Japan's real intention was to claim this area for themselves. With the benefits gained from the Qing dynasty, they began to practically monopolize the economy of this region. In 1932, they established a puppet government called Manchukuo. After the fall of the Japanese Empire, this area fell under the control of the Communist Party of China, which won the Chinese Civil War.
So, before 1949, when the Communist Party won the Civil War, there was no Chinese dynasty that properly ruled this region.
Anyway, below the People's Republic of China, Kim Il-sung's communist regime was established. Kim Il-sung aided Mao Zedong in the Chinese Civil War, and Mao decisively sent troops to North Korea in Korean War, preventing South Korea and the United States from unifying Korea. In 1964, the two countries, calling themselves blood allies, agreed to split Mount Baekdu in a secret treaty, setting up the current border.
This treaty was signed after Kim Il-sung demanded a division of Mount Baekdu, and China agreed after quick calculation. It was that important for Kim Il-sung to take even a portion of Mount Baekdu.
In Korean geography and history books, Mount Baekdu is considered the starting point of major mountain ranges crossing the country. On the other hand, in Chinese history, Mount Baekdu held little significance until the ethnic Manchus invaded China and established the Qing dynasty. Even then, the majority Han Chinese often showed indifference or disdain towards the history and culture of the Manchu people. This is because the Qing dynasty was ultimately destroyed by the invasion of Japan and West. Han Chinese who loved the Great China wanted to blame this shame on the Manchurians.
Anyway, in discussion of territory, I believe that most important factor is not ancient history or treaty between nations. It was the people who lived there.
In 1909, when Japan ceded the Gando territory to China, there were still many Koreans living there. During Japan's occupation, even more Koreans moved to this area to escape oppression. At that time, the Korean population in this region reached 1.7 million. After the defeat of Japan and the territory becoming part of China, some of them who had lived there returned to Korea, but others decided to stay. Here an incident occurred that decided their fate. It was the Chinese Civil War. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists told them to leave for Korea, but Mao Zedong welcomed them as comrades to help build the People's Republic of China. Some of them even assisted the Communist Party in the war. When the Communists eventually won the Civil War, the Constitution of the People's Republic of China included broad guarantees of minority rights. The Koreans who remained in the Gando region were given the name Jo-sunjok and were recognized as an ethnic minority.
They are legally Chinese but clearly originate from Korea and share the same culture and history with Koreans.
In 1952, a Korean-Chinese autonomous prefecture was established in Jilin province. The tourism and development of Baekdu Mountain was centered around the Korean-Chinese autonomous prefecture and society. A change occurred in the 1980s. China started its reform and opening up policy. The collapse of the socialist bloc became visible. The Communist Party thought that any independence movements by specific ethnic minorities could spread like wildfire in the winds of change. China felt an urgent need for strong national integration and revised its policies toward ethnic minorities. In 1983, Deng Xiaoping hiked the sacred mountain of the Korean Chinese and left an inscription. This act had huge meaning. Before just 1 year, China allowed Korean Chinese to visit their relatives in South Korea. For the first time, the Korean Chinese could freely travel to South Korea and witness its development.
It was dangerous for China that Korean Chinese were connecting with South Korea, rapidly developing ally of United States, rather than North Korea, which they could control. The worst case scenario was Korea being unified.
The Korean Chinese Autonomous Prefecture could potentially become as unstable as the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, where separatist movements could arise at any time. Baekdu Mountain was a focal point that could unite the Korean Chinese and South Koreans. Mao Zedong, the father of China, had no interest in this mountain and never visited it. Baekdu Mountain has now become a place of great significance to China. Since Deng Xiaoping's visit, Jiang Zemin visited Baekdu Mountain in 1995, and Hu Jintao visited in 2008. China's solution was to transform Baekdu Mountain from a Korean mountain to one belonging to the Chinese nation. But how?
It's difficult to describe a huge country like China in one word. But Koreans have done that. That word is 만만디.
That means slowly in Chinese. They may seem slow, but they persistently achieve their goals, like a massive river winding its way slowly but surely.
They carried out this project over decades using every possible means through generation. They even took a step back when necessary. I have summarized their method into 4. The first thing is name organization.
Large mountains often have multiple names. Another name for Baekdu-san is Jangbaek-san. Both names contain the meaning white. In Chinese, Jangbaek-san is pronounced Changbai-shan. Both Koreans and Chinese naturally used both names interchangeably. This is the full text of the treaty that North Korea and China agreed to share Mount Baekdu in 1964. This treaty was signed by Kim Il-sung and Zhou Enlai and was originally a secret treaty, but was made public during the Cultural Revolution. This was written in Chinese. The mountain is clearly referred to as Baekdu Mountain. The term Changbai Mountain is not mentioned even once. However, since the 2000s, China has intentionally started to distinguish the names. They enforced the use of Changbai Mountain instead of Baekdu Mountain. In 2006, they ordered all schools in the Baekdu Mountain area to add Changbai Mountain to their names. At the local government level, they encouraged the use of Changbai Mountain in regional advertisements, publications, and trademarks instead of Baekdu Mountain. Naming is very important in territorial disputes. China understood this very well. As a result, when you look at Baekdu Mountain on Google Earth after 2022, you will only see it labeled as Changbai Mountain Cultural District. To the average person, it would naturally appear that this mountain belongs to China.
The second task is making the Chinese recognize Baekdu Mountain as their mountain. The power of 1.4 billion people is enormous.
As of 2023, the number of domestic tourists in China who stayed at least one night was 2.4 billion. The Chinese people love mountains. For thousands of years, they have admired 5 great mountains, which are central to their culture. In 2003, a research institute following government orders announced a list of China's top 10 famous mountains. It makes sense that the list grew from 5 to 10 with changing times. However, some choices were controversial. The list included Yushan in Taiwan, Everest in Tibet, and Baekdu Mountain, which Han Chinese had largely ignored.
The research institute says it surveyed 12,000 Chinese people, but the list is highly political.
After this, the development plans for Baekdu Mountain progressed rapidly. In 2007, the Chinese government registered the Baekdu Mountain area as a 5A tourist site. In 2008, Changbai Airport was built. Road networks connecting Baekdu Mountain to major cities began to be constructed. Since 2016, sections of high-speed rail have gradually opened. Tourist numbers to Baekdu Mountain have steadily increased, with over 1.6 million visitors last year. Through the new transportation infrastructure, Baekdu Mountain's specialties, like mineral water and timber, are sold in big cities like Shanghai and Guangdong, boosting the Changbai brand.
However, in the process of developing Baekdu Mountain, the Korean-Chinese were intentionally excluded. This is the third strategy.
Originally, the Baekdu Mountain tourism business was primarily managed by the Yanbian Korean Autonomous Prefecture. This area's tourism relied on visitors from South Korea and various parts of China. However, in 2005, China established a special administrative zone called the Changbai Protection and Development Zone in this region. This zone was placed directly under the jurisdiction of the Jilin provincial government, effectively cutting off the influence of the Korean Autonomous Prefecture over the Baekdu Mountain area. In minority autonomous regions, signs must be displayed in both Chinese and the minority language. Thus, traffic signs near Baekdu Mountain included Korean. But after incorporating Baekdu Mountain into the special zone, China removed all Korean from the signs. Their reasoning was that minority protection policies did not apply to special administrative zones. Infrastructure development, including airport site selection and railway and road planning, was done in ways unfavorable to the Korean Autonomous Prefecture, impacting its local economy. China employed every tactic at its disposal. They even forced the closure of 5 South Korean or Korean Chinese-run businesses near Baekdu Mountain, citing issues with World Natural Heritage designation.
The final strategy is China's most cunning tactic. It is historical distortion. There's no country and people that value history as much as China.
Chinese spokespersons and leaders often quote ancient sayings and act according to historical lessons. They know the importance of controlling historical hegemony. Their strategy to erase the Korean history of Baekdu Mountain is learned from history. It's the using barbarians to control another barbarian strategy, historically used by Chinese dynasties to manage neighboring countries. This time, they used Manchu history to cover up Korean history. The Manchus, now the second largest minority group in northeast China, with a population of 10 million, have largely lost their language and adopted Han Chinese culture. The likelihood of the Manchus establishing an independent state is very low.
The Chinese were not interested in the history of Manchu people for a long time. Suddenly, they started paying attention to Manchu's history.
In 2000, the Jilin Changbai Culture Research Association was established. This large organization now has over 300 members. Their main activity is to find historical evidence and arguments proving that the Manchus were the original owners of Baekdu Mountain. Their efforts culminated in the Changbai Manchu Museum. This museum and other sites around Changbai are now filled with Manchu history. There's no trace of Korean heritage or the name Baekdu Mountain.
Some scholars are also trying to argue that Koreans didn't historically regard the Baekdu Mountain as special. They are attempting to create fake evidence to support their claim. In a situation like this, it would be natural for the affected country to make diplomatic protests to China.
However, North Korea, a key player in this issue, is heavily dependent on China. After Kim Jong-un came to power and pursued nuclear armament, North Korea has faced severe economic sanctions. As of 2024, North Korea's economy shows no signs of improvement, making it impossible for them to protest against China. South Korea also finds it difficult to properly protest against China. From South Korea's perspective, the immediate neighboring country is North Korea. Currently, inter-Korean relations are so deteriorated that meaningful dialogue between one ethnic is almost impossible. Moreover, South Korea is a democratic country, where its diplomatic stance on China and North Korea is determined by presidential elections held every 5 years.
A long, long time ago.
Currently, South Korea is under a conservative government with a strong pro-American stance. Relations with both North Korea and China are tense. On the other hand, China has been slowly but steadily achieving its goals, like a massive river. During the mid-2000s, when relations between North Korea and South Korea were very good, China refrained from making provocative statements, fearing strong joint protests from both Koreas. The same was true in 2018, when a similar atmosphere prevailed.
When the news broke in March 2024 about UNESCO Geopark inclusion, I was shocked by how little attention people around me were paying to the issue. Koreans have been feeling tired of China's ongoing historical distortion since the 2000s.
Moreover, at that time, the general election for the National Assembly was just 2 weeks away, and all public attention was focused on it. During this period, China quietly achieved what it wanted. China will continue to forge ahead without stopping. The next step after the designation of the Changbai Mountain World Geopark is to have this mountain recognized as a World Natural Heritage Site under its own name. The Baekdu Mountain project is just a part of the process. China will persist in its efforts to erase the Korean-Chinese identity. Despite the constitutional guarantee of autonomy for ethnic minorities, the autonomy of the Korean Chinese is steadily diminishing. In Korean Chinese neighborhoods, it has become increasingly difficult to find signs in Hangul, Korean text.
It seems like China wants all ethnic minorities to become like Manchus. This means losing their language, weakening their identity, and becoming a part of the Great China.
The most tragic aspect is that what is happening in northeastern China is only the beginning. In the southwest, China has committed even harsher and more brutal actions against Tibet. In the northwest, the Uyghur Autonomous Region is practically occupied by Han Chinese. These efforts will continue and expand. The strategies that China used to turn Baekdu Mountain into Changbai Mountain will be applied to these regions as well. China's territory cannot be reduced by even an inch. This is what China wants. But modern China has come to possess territory that is too large for its capabilities. To protect itself, it is instead attempting to absorb everything around it like a black hole. This is dangerous.
So, thank you for watching the video. And if you have any question, leave the comment and I'll do my best to answer them. And subscribe and like would be great appreciated.